All right, welcome. I'm so excited to be here with Dr. Heather Chapman and Dave Yeager today. We're going to be talking a little bit about an exciting presentation that they will be doing for us at our Focus on the Future conference in May in the Seattle area. So welcome, Heather and Dave. It's always good to spend some time with you. I'd like to talk today a little bit about your presentation, and let's start with just some background on active military members and veterans both show elevated risk for problem gambling. Can you tell us a little bit about that and maybe why that's the case?
As multiple forms of gambling are easily accessible, it can lead to problems with gambling, and there's a lot of access for people in the military. One, on the base themselves, or downtime, people do play card games and so forth. On overseas bases, there are machines and other forms of gambling. Certainly, even in the desert, there's gambling going on. So it is something to do that most of the guys and gals that I work with, say that that's sort of just part of the culture, because it's easily accessible. It's not corrected or monitored like alcohol or drugs would be. I do think we're still struggling with, in our mental health culture, a lack of attention to this, because I think there's a lack of understanding of the impact of it. So I do think, screening is important, asking the questions, having the conversation, really thinking about stages of change where somebody might be, regarding their readiness to change, and then tailoring what you would do around that. I also think having some conversations around the protocol of SBIRT, screening and brief intervention and referral to treatment, I think is really important, and that's the SAMHSA model for substance abuse treatment. And I think using that same model, or there's several protocols for that for gambling, within a primary care or a general mental health professional, with refraining from sending someone to a specialist too early, because nobody wants to be feeling that they're labeled what used to be called pathological gambling. It sounds horrible. Too early, because it pathologizes, and it's potentially ahead of their curve, their cycle of readiness. So you want to make sure you're pacing it okay, and keeping up the conversation and asking, wondering about money and debt, why they might be in debt, asking those questions, asking what people are doing for fun and recreation, asking what kind of apps they have on their phone. I think that's it. And then, how do you have fun and recreation? How do you cope with stress? What are good coping mechanisms for stress?
How important will it be, and what will you be able to share during the presentation about the importance of clinicians and service providers hearing from people with lived experience? We can't always walk a mile in your boots, and I think that's particularly true when we talk about military personnel. If you've not been there, you don't know. So how important is that lived experience?
I think it's critical, but I think more important than that is the ability to connect. So, as I fell into my addiction and struggled with my addiction through active duty and into my veteran years, one of the biggest things I can remember thinking is nobody could ever possibly understand what I'm going through. Because it was and I always use this term, it was such a Jekyll and Hyde life that I lived. I had this neat, clean living, go to work, do all those things, and then right next to it was this obsessive desire to gamble. And how could anybody ever possibly understand that? So just the ability to sit in front of somebody and have them, ease me into that conversation, and Dr. Chapman talked about stages of change and readiness. And that's exactly right, because all I wanted to hear was that somebody got it. Somebody could possibly understand where I was. And then I would have let go at that point. And I did. When I finally did discover that, I let go. Now, the value and lived experience in that is we've been there and done it. So I, as somebody who's gone through this, I can look at somebody who's struggling with gambling, and I may not know exactly where they are, but a lot of what they're expressing in terms of their feelings, I can understand it. It's one of the reasons that, self-help groups like 12-step groups work, is because you're sitting in a room full of people who understand what everybody else is saying. Now you add into that the element of being a veteran, and some of the stigma, busting things that have to happen just from being a veteran and not being willing to admit anything. It does, I think, does make a difference.
Love it. And then last, if each of you could talk maybe about some of the resources you'll share, Heather, in terms of any insights on those kinds of supports that are available outside individual counseling, and Dave, in particular, the Fall In podcast. So let's end with that. Heather first, and then Dave, if you can share a little bit about Fall In podcast and what people will learn at your presentation.
Yeah, I do think that the podcasts are really good. I think it can open a door for people that never thought about it. It destigmatizes. So I think that we're living in a really cool era where people are hearing about things that it's like, oh my gosh, that's me. And it destigmatizes. Facebook groups, Instagram groups, they're all really important in the process of this. There's lots of online testing that can be helpful. We use some measurement-based care that can be helpful. Even the little brief testing that's on many of the councils for problem gambling, just the little kind of ask a few questions. And if you have a problem, what might that look like? I think that can be really helpful to just begin the conversation, because we all do this. We all go online and start there. I have this wonderful video of a guy that's doing the 20 questions online. He's not a veteran. He's just a guy. He posted it online, and I downloaded it years ago. And it's sitting with the moment of him recognizing that might have a problem. And it really is an eye-opening moment that he talks about calling a hotline and how weird that was and how hard that was. And I think sometimes we forget how hard it is for people to come in and share what's going on. So I think slowing down, what we need to do is slow down the pace of what we do, utilize the evidence-based practices, cognitive behavioral therapy, motivational interviewing, mindfulness-based interventions can all be very helpful, and utilize those processes and utilize even the tools. And there are some manuals and so forth that some people use, but utilize them within the context of what it's like to be with the person right now and what are they really ready for. There are some people that I've worked with. There's a guy that I'm working with now, and I just went really slow. It took me a while to start doing the inventories because I think he needed to get to know me first.
Yeah, I guess it's my turn. All right, so I do want to talk a little bit about the podcast. I put this podcast together because there were other gambling podcasts out there that I just thought were such a fabulous resource for people who maybe didn't understand the addiction or maybe didn't feel like they could be connected, like I felt before I got into treatment, like nobody could understand me. Just to have somebody on there to be a voice to say, this is happening to me, this is what happened to me, this is what I'm doing in my recovery, and this is how I feel right now. What a huge difference that makes. So I started hearing all this and I thought, you know what, why can't I do something like this for service members and veterans? This was my story. This is where I came from. The most important guests that I've had on this podcast are the service members and the veterans who've struggled with a gambling addiction, who are finding their way through that gambling addiction and finding the other side. Because really it's about hope. It's about that person being out there and hearing this thing. It's so interesting. I had somebody reach out to me not too long ago from the Midwest who said, I've been in recovery now for 10 years and my recovery has kind of been lagging. I heard about your podcast. I started listening to it and my world changed. He now has a renewed energy in his recovery. He's now trying to pay it forward. It's those types of things that we're trying to do. And it's reaching the guy too that just is struggling. He just doesn't know where to go. He or she doesn't know where to go. And through this, I've actually been able to refer a few people, into treatment and get them the help that they need. Whether it's to Dr. Chapman or whether it's to other resources, to be able to do that boy, talk about paying it forward, talking about getting all the things that I've been given through my own treatment and my own experiences and being able to share it out to give somebody else an opportunity to have some hope. What a difference that makes for me. That's about as rich as I want to be in my life right there.